This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm Jamie Bogner. This is episode 219. It is our last episode of 2021. We're going to bring this year to a close. We will be back next year with more podcasts. But today, joining us for this ultimate podcast of this past year is David Walker, co-founder of Firestone Walker Brewing Company. Welcome to the podcast, David.
Fantastic. Last but not least. I love it.
The grand finale of 2021.
Hollywood. What a great word. Ultimate.
Exactly. Yeah. Firestone Walker is a media partner of Craft Beer and Brewing. We thank Firestone Walker for their support in bringing great stories and conversations to you. Over the years, I've had so many great conversations with David. You may not realize it, but so many of the ideas that we then start to develop into stories and whatnot, whether it's our brewing industry guide or Craft Beer and Brewing, get kicked off by these odd conversations and, here and there. And so even in our very first issue of the brewing industry guide, talking about those stages of growth, story idea that we could probably attribute to that conversation way back in Paso, back in the day, David. I can't wait to talk about Firestone Walker's culture of excellence, building this kind of high-performance brewery, being able to grow quickly, being able to fail fast and move and explore different realms of brewing, push and be successful in so many different styles and in so many different kinds of markets. On top of that, the breadth of Firestone Walker as a business in the brewing world is really phenomenal. We're going to dive into all of those topics, but first, for nearly 30 years, G&D Chillers has set the mark for quality equipment you can rely on. G&D stands above the rest as the only chiller manufacturer that engineers your glycol piping for free. G&D stands alone as the only chiller manufacturer with an in-house team of installers and engineers with 30 years of real-world field labor experience in breweries, wineries, and distilleries. Contact the Total Glycol System Design experts today at gdchillers.com. Also, this episode is sponsored by BSG Craft Brewing. Explore a whole universe of hop sensory with unique varieties like Cashmere, Comet, Triumph, Eldorado, and more. Sourced directly from growers and processed at BSG's FSSC certified facility in Yakima to bring you only the very best hops from farmer to fermenter. For contracting, spot sales, and more info, reach out to them at Let's Talk Hops at bsgcraft.com. So, David, this is the 25th anniversary of Firestone Walker. That is a long and storied history for you all. Things are a little different now than they were 25 years ago as you had that crazy idea to start a brewery.
Yes, just a little bit. I think the brewery has exceeded our dreams, hopes and dreams, and we remain deeply grateful and somewhat humbled by the whole experience.
What was the original vision? What did you think you might be able to achieve as you were kicking around the idea of putting this business together?
It was sort of interesting. When Adam and I started the brewery, he was running a third-generation family winery. I was growing grapes, and I was in the tech business. And so we both had sort of robust day jobs, not to mention mortgages and suburban full of kids and so forth. So we sort of had responsibilities. And so literally we started it as a side project. I mean, there was definitely intention there. He'd sat through the bleachers of the modern American wine revolution. I understood a little bit about disruption. So, it wasn't a complete wild hair. We knew that if we started a brewery, it would have some relevance. But, our hope was we could get it to about 10,000 barrels. And for several years, we've never really sold it outside of a couple of counties in the central coast of California, which was sort of a reflection on our vision for it at the time, the amount of time that we could commit to it, both sort of financially and personally. And so it really truly was a small organic sort of artisanal project. We both preferred beer. for a couple of blokes in the wine business, sort of mildly counterproductive. So, I mean, that drove, kept things alive. But yeah, I mean, so yeah, 10,000 barrels. Think about that.
What was the moment where you realized it was going to be more than that? Where if you refocused your time, that you all, as entrepreneurial business people in a beverage space, could turn this into way more than you thought it was going to originally be possible?
God, there was never any sort of aha moment. I look back through the whole experience, and it's been a sort of a million strokes. It's been sedimentary layers of progress. One, and you just sort of stand on the next one, and then on the next one. God, I mean, there's so many moments. I remember, when we gave birth to DBA. This was our very first beer. English pale ale, Burtonized. It was, it still does primary fermentation in sort of oak barrels. Our attempt at trying to sort of replicate Burton Unions, floor malts, Maris Otter, English East Kent Goldings. I mean, London ale yeast. I mean, everything. It sort of embodied all the hopes and dreams of everything that we wanted to do. And it worked. I mean, people loved it. And that, when we saw that vision come together in the early days, it was a little bit like, this is fully formed. This is real. This is really wonderful. This wasn't some wild notion. But, in terms of, the scale of the brewery, Adam and I always used to joke about getting wind in our sails. I mean, we're both a couple of sailors, but one day we'll get wind in our sails and look out. We'll need another, bottling line or whatever. So wind in the sails of most craft breweries hit sort of, it was strange. It hit in that moment in the sort of mid-early 2000s, 2005, 2006, 2007. There were 100 reasons. Social media tweets, the first tweets started to fly. We as a brewing community sort of hit a critical mass in terms of the amount of brewers, the noise we made, the allegiances we formed with our associations and with our guilds. And just the noise became legitimate. People sort of said, hang on a second, these aren't just eccentric folks. And then I suppose, on a really geeky technical standard, ABI got acquired in 2007. And, I always felt that we sort of were brewers in America at their dispensation up until that point. And, they had the majority of the market. They sort of set the tone for the whole market, for wholesale, for retail. And essentially when they changed hands and they sort of, obviously lost a lot of market share, they remained obviously incredibly profitable. A lot of the stress went out of the market. And I truly believe that opened up opportunities with wholesalers, with routes to market. Wholesalers became more interested now. They didn't need to be sort of closet craft lovers. And that's all we needed. It was just a little bit of oxygen. And that moment, obviously, I mean, you can track it. Things really did start to explode. The long tail of smaller brewers began to really find a model that worked. And consumers began to recognize them as really great, legitimate breweries to be fans of. And so I suppose that moment.
That's an interesting time period too, because that 2007, then 2008, going into that big crash and then the ensuing recession threw a lot of things into flux. All of a sudden, I think you can also look back at that as one of the kind of formative elements of the giant craft beer boom of the 2010s, that people rethinking, people out of work rethinking what they were doing, decided to pursue passions, and that has led to growth in breweries like nobody's business. But kind of, fascinating that, that all of those things aligned right around that same time to kind of create an environment that would also help continue to foster craft beer. Through this, and you've mentioned this to me before, every moment of growth for you all involves investment or major capital outlays or taking on significant debt to try to fund the next generation of growth produces a certain amount of risk that all along that way, even though it's exciting, even though there's wind in your sails and you are following this momentum upwards, making each one of those steps is also, like taking a step blindly off the precipice and hoping, that there's something that you're going to be able to land on something when you do. Talk to me about some of those risky moments where you all you took on those risks, not necessarily knowing if they were going to entirely deliver on what you thought they would.
Well, the great thing about a brewery, especially a closely held brewery that Adam and I had, is that you sort of don't view it as a business. You sort of view it as a sort of a member of the family. So it's a little bit like, you'll sit at home and justify a huge amount of money for a new bathroom. And like, there's absolutely no way you're ever going to get the money back. But it's like, we're going to live here. It's what we love and so on. And in some ways, it's a similar dynamic. I mean, every penny we put into the brewery was a penny of love. It wasn't, what's the business case on this? I mean, without question, the bigger you get, you ultimately have to do that sort of grown-up analysis. But no, I mean, breweries are very much a labor of love. They draw you in. They bewitch you, so you're constantly thinking about expanding, tweaking, upgrading, changing, adding some whimsy, adding some technology, adding some efficiency. And so I'd like to say that if we did anything right in terms of expanding our brewery, we waited to the last minute before we added the expansion. So literally, we were at the seams before relief arrived, before the cavalry arrived. And there were 4 or 5 key expansion moments for us when that happened. And I always felt relieved at that. I mean, I would have been incredibly nervous staring at a brewery that we'd overbuilt, praying for momentum and wind in our sails. Lucky for us, we were always sort of gasping for capacity, and it came online and bang, all of a sudden we said, well, how did we live without that capacity? And that's a wonderful thing. When I always like to say there's nothing more exhilarating than a brewery at full capacity, and there's nothing more depressing than a brewery that's way below capacity. It's like a forest without birds, it's anyway. Yeah, sure.
The scale of those expansions has, of course, significantly grown each time that you've done it. The last one was even more significant, and it seems when I was just out there over the last few months that it continues, to be happening. Whereas it's less and less of we're going to make a giant expansion, and now we're just always expanding in some way or another. How has that become a part of the general process for the brewery?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that has, I mean, it's just that sort of recognition that you constantly need to be maintaining, replacing, or expanding parts of the brewery. So there's a constant draw on capital investment. It's capital intensive business after all. Obviously we continue to grow, and we have never not grown. So there's always a need for additional capacity. I hope and pray there's not a day when we head in the other direction. Yeah, I mean, it's a very simple equation. There's no mystery to it. I mean, you make decisions every day about what you need and what you don't need, and what you can afford and what you can afford to take a risk on, and it's no different.
You're also investing in things like sustainability that are not necessarily hitting, a pure bottom line growth, part of that kind of P&L. You're not seeing a direct return on it. It's a much more long-term return. Let's talk about that. But before we do, the world of craft beer is a different place now. Margins are more important than ever, so why not lower your ingredient cost? Craft juice concentrates from Old Orchard are the cost-effective solution for your fruit-forward needs. Old Orchard produces high volumes of their retail juice brand, so economies of scale keep prices low for the bulk supply program. A little concentrate goes a long way, and you won't lose some of it through filtering like you would with purees. To start increasing your margins now, head on over to www.oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, what if you could take your favorite recipe and make a non-alcoholic version without sacrificing the flavor, color, or beer quality? NA, no problem. The Alchemator from ProBrew uses proprietary membrane technology to strip the alcohol from the beer without sacrificing all the elements like flavor and color that make the beer great. Are you ready to brew like a pro? The Alchemator from ProBrew. NA, no problem. Email contact@probrew.com for more info. David, talk to me about the investments that you all have been making, significant investments in sustainability where you are in California. Certainly water, waste management, all of these things are important concerns. Even though environmental stewardship doesn't necessarily show up on, that P&L, you all are putting some serious resources behind that.
Yeah, we are. I mean, obviously a lot of it's out of choice, but I sort of harp on about this a lot. I mean, great brewers conserve all inputs: water, power, raw materials. They have to. I mean, brewing beer is as old as Methuselah, and has essentially that. There's no patents here. There's no secret sauce. You just make great, beautiful beer, and so there's a lot of competition, and it needs to be competitive. It needs to be affordable for the common drinker. And so, you have to, you can't be wasteful making beer. And essentially waste is at the heart of combating sustainability. If you combat waste, then you're on your way to essentially working towards a sustainable outcome. So, everything from building buildings that don't suck electricity, simple things like LED versus standard fluorescent lighting, things like reusing parts that you sort of pull down from old projects. Obviously it's a no-brainer. In our case, we have a 10-acre solar array that drives, depending on the price of energy, $400,000 to $500,000 a year in savings on energy. Water is obviously a huge thing in California. Our ability to reduce the amount of water we use to create a pint of beer is really just a massive KPI that we watch at all points. So yeah, I mean, absolutely, sustainability is to a brewer, it should be reflexive. In a modern age now, it's actually more than reflexive. It's actually sort of aspirational desire in terms of, well, hang on a second. Raw materials, energy, all of these things are impacting carbon footprint, climate change, et cetera, et cetera. So there's actually a nice sort of nexus where they sort of actually are drawn together. It's a very, very important part of what we do, but it always has been.
Looking at that though, from a business perspective, how do you balance what you invest in that? Because it would be pretty easy to spend everything you made on achieving greater efficiency and creating pushing this kind of sustainable element. Do you have a rule of thumb about how much you are willing, you could reasonably spend in that regard or invest in that for the business? I mean, how is your thinking about that? Do you make some of those decisions?
Yeah, I mean, you have to do a business case. Robust carbon capture in a brewery doesn't start penciling out till you're sort of 400,000 or 500,000 barrels. If you were to do that at 100,000 barrels, it would be a huge investment.
Right.
So, things like that, you just sort of hit them at a certain point. We sell 80% of our beer in California, which is great. We do sell our beer in other states. We sell our beer on the East Coast, and it's a wonderful thing. You can get it there. Now, we could, as a brewery, say, well, the carbon footprint on our beer in the East Coast is not as good as it is on the West, so let's just sell beer on the West. And technically, you could make that argument. We choose not to do that. But I lie in bed at night feeling that the fact that we do sell 80% of our beer on the West, that is I suppose it's not intentional, but it's a nice byproduct of great. It's actually a nice byproduct of the sort of craft beer proposition to the consumer. It's like, I'm drinking a beer that's made locally. Carbon footprint on that beer is much better than, one coming from Holland. I think, these are sort of things that I use to sort of make a decision about what I'm drinking.
Speaking of selling beer in California, let's kind of talk about some of the dynamic change that has happened for Firestone Walker over the last 5 to 8 years. As you all moved down this brewery path, you were very focused on the kinds of beers that craft brewers made in the 2000s and early 2010s. It was very much let's make IPAs, let's make our English style, our DBA. You got into some fun fringer beers like barrel aged beers. You launched Barrel Works to make sour beer, kind of taking a winemaker's approach to making beer itself. But one of the big moves that you made was launching a mass, or I shouldn't call it a mass, a larger consumer brand that was built around a lifestyle idea in 805, a simple blonde ale. I shouldn't say simple because there's, it's incredibly hard to make a beautifully simple beer like that. Marketed in a very different way to a different type of consumer than, Firestone Walker was really comfortable with. Talk to me a little bit about the genesis of that idea and how that brand has developed, and how you all have been able to build that into such a powerhouse, especially in your home state of California.
Well, first of all, I'd argue that we never set out to create a brand like the 805. And I actually think...
I know that because you've told me that before, that it was very much, that sedimentary layer of,
Right, exactly. I always think, in terms of the beer gods bestowing a brand like that on any of the brewer, it's sort of like a joke. Because we were so wrapped around the axle of sort of hop forward, American craft beer flavors, pushing innovation, being true to those revolutionary styles. And 805 represents a different metric. And I think it was truly a legitimate, authentic evolution. I mean, we made a beer. What happened? I mean, just to give you some background, Anheuser-Busch in the early 2000s went through the country trademarking area codes. For some reason, they didn't think ours was relevant. We sort of trademarked it back, and then we had a beer that we were selling as sort of a shift beer to the brewers, and we'd take it to events, and it would always outsell everything else we did. And we let some of our local pubs have it as a private label beer, and realized that, hang on a second, this thing is a crowd pleaser. So we blended the two, and it sort of took flight. And literally, county by county, we sort of let it expand, and it became what it became. I mean, I suppose it taught us a little bit of the the branding side of beer that we somewhat sort of eschewed. It's like it's all,
sure.
We didn't, because it was a sort of a lucky shot. I mean, we just, it was a very simple branding and it was working. We didn't touch it. We just did not touch it. And it sort of formed itself, and we responded to the consumer. It was became a sort of a moniker of a lifestyle. Our region, most folks are either wannabe cowboys or wannabe surfers, and so it was a very simple narrative, and the thing took off. And we've just done our best to keep it healthy and pointing in the right direction. And we never I promise you, we never set out to do that, to create it. I mean, it just happened. We're very proud of it. Matt Brynildson, I'm biased, arguably one of the finest brewers in the world, will tell you that 805 is his finest achievement because he actually got to stick it to that, to brewers that were actually playing in that space and would sort of look down their nose at what we were doing. And all of a sudden it's like, hey, I can do what you can do too. And actually a little better. So, anyway, who knows? We've been very blessed. I mean, if I don't credit us with much in terms of that, other than the fact that when it was given to us, we didn't fuck it up. And in fact, in some ways, that's one of the hardest things to do. So.
Sure. I remember the moment that it clicked for me was when we were driving the craft beer and brewing RV south from Paso. It was probably 2015 when we had that, and I just remember passing a truck next to us, totally murdered out, just, black head to toe, the darkest windows you've ever seen. The only white thing you could read on the truck was a little 805 sticker on the back window. Everything else, taillights, everything completely murdered out.
Yeah.
And that's this moment where you realize that, beer is something, people, for them, the brands and their connection to these consumer products reflect some of their identity as who they are. And you all found a way to tap into that with something that felt really connective. But it is, when you say you didn't fuck it up, you're absolutely right. All of the marketing, all of the branding, building a separate brand structure for 805 so that it didn't necessarily, wasn't parroting the Firestone Walker brand itself. Like, people could love 805 and not even know that Firestone Walker made that beer. And that was okay.
And I think ultimately, and maybe, this is one of the key pillars to American craft brewing is people love beer. I mean, they really love it. It's a social lubricant. It's part of their fabric of their life. It puts a smile on their face. It's a moment of where they can sit down with their friends, or just sort of reflect on their own. I mean, it's a really important thing. And to drink a beer that you've got no emotional connection to, just like a brand of underpants, do you know what I mean? I mean, you just sort of put them on, is nuts. And so if you can actually have an emotional connection with your beer, I mean, it's just a wonderful thing. And I believe we've done that. I believe we've done that with 805. Absolutely.
That is the stock and trade of winemakers in that sense, that building that romantic connection to, place and land and the flavors that are associated with that. I mean, that's kind of a crucial piece to that element of wine marketing. You all, while taking a different aesthetic approach, we're using a lot of the same mechanisms to build the idea of lifestyle, that car club, that motorcycle rider, that surfer, that cowboy, all of those pieces that were aspirational for folks that kind of connected to this idea of what the 805 means.
Absolutely. Yep. It's a wonderful thing.
And now there's this question that every brewer faces, because is it success that you're happy with? When I was talking to a small brewer making spontaneous beer earlier this year, they mentioned we never started making other beers because we were too afraid that they'd become successful. And if they became successful, then that would distract us from what our primary goal was. 805 is definitely it's a huge amount of what Firestone Walker makes in any given year. For you all looking at it, how do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, we can chuckle. We say it's a little bit of a cuckoo in the nest. But, like I said, when we look at it in real terms, I mean, we're immensely proud of it. I'm absolutely immensely proud of it. In terms of how it's driven us as a brewery, without question, it's defined us. It's defined the fact that we, fingers crossed, will brew 600,000 barrels of beer next year, and we have hopes and dreams to be a 1 million barrel brewery by the end of the decade. It's definitely part of that plan. So, I mean, it has ultimately defined us, but that's not to mean that it'll continue to define us. I mean, it didn't define us for the first sort of 15 years of our life. Nothing's really forever. I mean, there is this sort of insatiable. I mean, once you become a brewery, you sort of you're standing on an accelerating like an accelerating escalator. I mean that has no end, and it is a. I mean, it's not something that you can sit out and sort of have an out of body experience and watch yourself in. I mean, it's all on, full on, all the time. You're fully engaged, and you're always looking for the next. You're looking for the next batch of beer. You're looking for the next beer. You're looking for the next customer. You're looking for the next market, and I wish I could be a little bit more sort of philosophical and grown up about it, to say like, I just think we'd like to be this size and not bigger. And I just don't think you can do that as a brewery. I think you have to keep evolving. I mean, it's a better word than growing, because growing has got some sort of, you could call it capitalist notion of greed and so on and so forth. Without question, you're growing in those terms, but evolving and just constantly doing new things. And I mean, 805 at the moment is a big part of our life. Will it be in 10 years? I hope so, but if not, there'll be something else.
At the same time, on the craft side, you all continue to experience the same kind of thing. You create new things. And in the craft beer world, the lifespan of brands, we've watched it get smaller and smaller, that you hope you create beers that can stand the test of time, but realistically you create something, and if you get a few years out of it, you're pretty happy with it before consumers want that new thing. You all have been engaging in that, whether it's the Luponic Distortion category, or whether it's now the Mind Haze brand, coming up with new ideas, pushing new things out there. Some of them work, some of them haven't worked. There have been some forays into, fruity beers that, I'm trying to play in a seltzer space that maybe didn't find the market that they wanted to. But at the same time, you have beers like Mind Haze that have grown and become kind of powerhouse families, whether, and that's a hard thing for you all as a business, to try to know which ones are going to be those things, because you don't. When you get those started, you just put those things out, do your best work to create the best possible thing you can, and then see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, American craft brewers are sort of responsible for this insane sort of acceleration of innovation and flavor and so forth. And the more fashionable you are, the quicker you go out of fashion. And it's a little bit of that dynamic. American craft brewers brought flavor and innovation and disruption to a monolithic beer industry worldwide. And they changed the world of beer, and they changed the consumer. And so the consumers that we're talking to most of the time, and it's a little like, be careful what you wish for. I mean, engaged in this sort of constant experimentation. And in the case of Mind Haze, I mean, first of all, in the case of IPA, I mean, IPA really manifest American craft beer brewers. I mean, it's craft beer. I mean, it was obviously, IPA was obviously a style within 100 styles, but it was the style with the broadest shoulders, with the most ability to showcase the hopes and dreams of craft brewers. And so that's why it became the platform it has become. And hazy IPAs to me are just a natural evolution. I mean, it's the, I have 3 daughters in their mid-20s, and they really started drinking beer when they were hazy. I mean, those were the beers that they were drinking. I mean, I was weaned on English pale ales. I mean, I love them. But they find those beers sort of antique. They're looking for tropical flavors. They like the full-bodied qualities of hazy beers, and the sort of the whimsical narrative of hazy beers. So it's there's 100 things that are wrapped up in that choice for them, but it's their moment, it's their beer. That might change again. That might change again. Who knows? And you could argue it's one of the reasons why there's a whole group of people charging off and drinking sort of fruit-forward waters and seltzers and RTDs and tiki drinks and, putting banana flavoring in bourbon. I mean, it's all part of this sort of trend in that area. So, yeah.
But even though it is, I think there's a couple of pieces there. Number one, from generation to generation, Americans in particular have either flirted with, I drink what my parents drink, or I don't drink anything that my parents drink, depending on that kind of, where you are and, what kind of, rebellion defines that particular generation. As of late, every generation and every, 5 to 10 years is looking to find some way to define itself as separate and apart from their parents. And I think that speaks to exactly what you were saying, that this is their thing. Not to say that they're the only 20-somethings are drinking these hazy beers. Certainly that they're compelling across, the spectrum. And oftentimes people that start there don't end up there. That, there's also that beauty as people rediscover some of those classic things. And for every banana flavored bourbon out there, the unadulterated, beautiful historical constructions, that are aged for many, many years are certainly commanding prime prices.
Yeah,
the consumer. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, there's without question, I think the current sort of peak sort of social generation, the 25-year-olds, whatever. They're actually, I think, a lot cooler than I ever was. They do actually look back and say, Dad, that's your beer. I mean, that's part of the problem with being 25-year-old brewery is that truly I'm serving beer to the children of the people I served beer to when we started. So they're willing to say, it's sort of cool that but when you look at larger trends, I think the sort of trends that hazy IPAs are playing into are much broader trends in that market. And I think the alcoholic beverage space is insane at the moment.
For sure.
For a lot of those reasons. So.
Well, I want to talk about how you all, as a 25-year-old company, continue to stay on top of those kinds of creative developments. Before we do that, this episode is brought to you by Mountain Rose Herbs, purveyors of the highest quality organic herbs, spices, and teas. Whether you want to add depth to your next golden triple with classic notes of cinnamon, pepper, and clove, or artfully layer exotic, zesty grains of paradise into a perfect ale, adding botanicals to your brewing is an easy way to customize a delicious flavor profile. Mountain Rose Herbs has been providing organic herbs and spices to chefs, herbalists, and dedicated brewers for more than 3 decades. Learn more at mountainroseherbs.com and get 10% off any and all orders with the code CRAFTBEER10. Also, as a brewery owner, you know how important it is to keep your machines running so you don't have to deal with the hassle caused by contamination, recalls, and downtime. Clarion makes food-grade lubricants to protect your equipment from the wear and tear that results in breakdowns that cut into your bottom line. Clarion gives you peace of mind so you can focus on what you do best, pouring out great-tasting beverages. Learn more at www.clarionlubricants.com. So David, talk to me about this. You all have been in the business for a long time, but staying current, it's like aging, like arena rockers. You hit a certain point, you found that success, you can look at it, but people don't necessarily look at you as driving the aesthetic and creative conversation at that point. In beer, you've got to stay current, you've got to keep it fresh in order to, find that connection to today's audiences. How do you all make sure that element of creativity and that spark of the new is constantly imbued in your creative process?
Well, first of all, the visionary for our beers is Matt Brittleson, and he's probably the most curious guy I've ever met. So it starts with curiosity. I think you can be young and curious, and you can be old and curious. But I think if you're not curious, then you're not. I don't care whether young or old, you're gonna miss all these discoveries that you were talking about. So from that standpoint, I always I lean really heavily on Matt's sort of instincts and what he's seeing. We have actually created some intentional systems at the brewery to encourage this. And we obviously built a small brewery in Los Angeles, in Venice, and we put a really beautiful little Casper Schultz 10 hectoliter system in there, and we crank through experimental brewing down there, and we're working on hop profiles, we're working on yeast profiles, we're working on all sorts of different beers, and so having that sort of active process is definitely a platform that encourages us to sort of try and discover new things. We recently, actually, in the last 2.5 years, we hired a new CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, and we hired him out of the music business. I mean, all of us spent about 18 painful months weaning him off Corona and trying to sort of get him sort of magically into craft beer, and it's happened. The light's gone off, and it's fantastic. But the great thing is, he's brought all these different insights to, how you talk about beer, and that gives us a whole nother sort of perspective. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's intentional things you can do like that, but in some ways, you have to really lean on the DNA of the brewery, and Matt's a huge part of that DNA.
So you just have to hire Matt Brindleton then. That's the secret.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it.
Take that advice. It is a tough. Watching Matt work has been fantastic because the way that he connects with new, hot, young brewers and is able to both give and to learn and to taste and understand and be a part of these things as they happen. It's cool to see it.
Yeah.
And not everyone is capable of doing that.
No, and listen, I loved Matt to death, but there's a lot of great brewers who are doing that. And I think that's, once again, one of the things that everybody says about our industry is that, there truly is a sort of a brotherhood, collaborative, esprit de corps, and especially amongst, the inspired brewing community. But there's really more than you think, actually, and they're all really nicely connected, and that actually you could argue is the DNA of American craft beer. I mean, things move really quickly in our community, and a function of that is, probably everybody's talking about it. Lager yeasts, with IPAs. There's a lot of good technical discussion around that, and that's sort of born out of quality and shelf life and other things. And all of a sudden, you've got, we have IPLs emerging. So it's not just one person. I would suggest it's a reflection on American craft beer.
But Firestone Walker staying in that creative conversation, that there's always a temptation as a business grows that large to look at scale and the things that you can sell the most of at the least possible cost to the largest amount of people. Rather than doing that, Firestone Walker, despite the scale of the business, has stayed very involved in that world of craft and on that small scale world of craft, whether it's things like the Firestone Walker Invitational Festival, which intentionally involves small breweries, or whether it's something like the Brewmasters Collective, membership-based club for special small beer releases. There are some curiously small things that the brewery stays involved in despite the scale. Is that part of the intentional strategy to stay connected? Are these just pieces that you all love them, you're not going to give them up? Or, is there some other strategy involved in that?
No, I mean, they're the spice in the omelet. It's that simple. I mean, just because they're small, somewhat insignificant in some ways in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't mean they don't provide flavor. and we treasure those things. I mean, we really do. And like I said, they legitimize a lot of other things that we do. So it's, yeah, absolutely. We'll continue to do those things. So,
but you say that, and that's a great soundbite. But then operating something like Barrel Works as a facility making
right.
sour beer,
Yeah.
like that, it's not an inexpensive proposition to do that in Buellton, especially given where wild and sour beer is right now. I mean, you really have to stay committed to that as a business.
Yeah, no, absolutely you do. I mean, it's extraordinary. That particular sort of segment in our world it's a riddle. I always remember I used to go to Belgium, and we'd drink these beers and we'd rave about them, and the people that we were spending time with in Belgium were interested in them, and I just found that curious. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact is they're very complex, super complex beers. And there's a very small and very complex community who are interested in those beers. And I think, you have to sort of, you have to build a model that sort of lives within those limitations. And Barrelworks has been an amazing journey for us. And probably the benefits to us as a brewery that we've got from Barrelworks are going to be hard for us to really ever account for. They provide dimension. Like I said, they provide spice. What's fascinating actually is as the beer world is experimenting with fruit at the moment, we have this almost sort of like classical education on how to integrate fruit with beer, because that's obviously one of the pillars of that whole program. So who knows? But yeah, you're right. No, these things are difficult. I'm not going to sugarcoat them. Some things are more difficult than others.
Sure. And of course, you all are, as some others are also, who have that kind of background capacity and knowledge of how to make these things, figuring out new ways to incorporate that kind of traditionally soured beer into products that might hit audiences in different kinds of ways. Maybe they're canned beers, maybe they're more fruit forward beers, and pushing that. And, I guess that speaks to that idea that you mentioned, like, the final chapter isn't written. Maybe this is yet another sedimentary layer,
right?
That you don't know what the next step is going to be, but you're going to keep rolling with it.
Yeah, I mean, without question, that's exactly the way that we look at it. I mean, no journey is wasted. We learn from everything. So, yeah, I mean, it is, yeah.
With some of these beers, and I think the Brewmasters Collective Beer Club is an example of that. The audience has grown. There's multiple audiences for these kinds of things. As I look at that, a club for a brewery or scale, it doesn't seem like it's interesting how much energy and marketing and push you all are putting behind it, given how much you could focus on other things throughout this.
Yeah, the whole club thing is 100% a byproduct of COVID. When we went into COVID, people weren't traveling. People would call us up about simple releases. We would release Parabola, or any one of the, one of our vintage ales, and people couldn't get them, and because we make them in such small quantities, often our wholesalers can't carry them, and I don't blame them for that. I mean, 100 cases of a beer that has to. I mean, it's hard for them to manage, and so. Within our legal limits, people called us up and, ship them a T-shirt, we ship them the beer. And we formalized that with this club. And, it's not a giant club on the scale where it would actually move the needle at all. But what it does do for us is it makes us feel, okay, we've got X amount of people who, and actually, they're the same people who've been showing up at our events for 20 years. I mean, I miss them. And, now they don't have to do that. I mean, which is sort of sad, but hopefully we'll see them at some point. But but yeah,
you're right. There is that super fan element to it that,
yeah.
for a brewery like you or a brand that has, sold beer to so many people for so many years, you develop that level of fan that really just wants to engage with your brand on a deeper level. And that's an interesting way to do that. There's also this trend, COVID, you're right, has brought around the idea of shipping beer more broadly and breweries getting involved in direct to consumer sales more than they have been. Obviously, we still have a 3-tier system in the United States, but COVID has softened some of the harder edges of that as we try to make it easier to get things to people. There has to be some element of, hey, let's build some aptitude in how we do that directly with consumers through these other channels. Again, in case it may not become something in the future, but maybe it does.
Yeah, no, I think the wine industry is a great model. They have much more universal ability to ship their products around. Now, there's a couple of reasons why. I mean, obviously, wine is not as fragile as beer, and so it's a lot easier to ship around and a lot safer from a quality standpoint. But that said, vintage beers, they're just as robust. And my sense is, open it up. I don't think it impacts the 3-tier system at all. I mean, I think the brewers who are engaged in these types of transactions, it's such a small, tiny fractional part of the beer business that for the stakeholders, that the various tiers to get upset about it, I think is there's other things they should be focused on.
And I'm not meaning to trigger any of those folks. What we are seeing now is a massively more complex beer world where people are ordering through Drizzly, which is sending in orders to the local store where somebody is, a delivery driver is then taking it to an end consumer. There are ways for every tier in the 3-tier system to potentially benefit from understanding how breweries can market and then sell beer in this kind of, digital realm to customers. It's not a place that breweries in particular have been focused on, but as we watch it, I mean, especially everyone, and even in this craft realm, from Sierra Nevada down to New Belgium and others, is absolutely, and Firestone Walker for that matter, focusing on how do we gain an aptitude in that, because creating an idea of a beer that people should then go to a beer store and buy has always been the thing that breweries do, rather than trying to spur on a direct sale where somebody actually then has that thing delivered to them. I mean, it's a different way of trying to sell beer to people.
Yeah, I mean, once again, I don't think we should get wrapped around the axle about it. I mean, there's some principles, there's some real sort of gravitational pull about the beer business that does not allow it to turn into a direct to consumer cold chain, low margins, quantity. It's heavy. The American beer distribution is the finest distribution system in the world, and they will deliver beautiful fresh beer all the way to the retailer, and the retailer will cold store it cold, and then people will bring it home. I mean, it's the most fabulous system. You're never really going up. I mean, you're just not. It's just not. I mean, there's no way I'm going to run a direct-to-consumer system that's ever going to compete with that at any level. Drizzly is a convenience play. Ultimately, it comes out of stores. I mean, you could obviously argue that one day that would, whether it's, it's direct to consumer from your local supermarket. I mean, it all starts to blend, but I think every stakeholder just does just fine out of this. And what's important to the brewing industry is that it stays interesting. And if American craft beer hadn't showed up 30 years ago, it'd be a really boring world for the beer guys. And they'd be up against it with the wine guys and the spirits guys who just look a lot sexier and a lot more with it. And, there's a, we need people. We need people praying for a bottle of Parabola for Christmas that shows up in their stocking and has been shipped all the way from Paso Robles, because that's passion. That's real passion for beer. So.
I agree with you. And, I have been known to strike a familiar chord as that when it comes to hard seltzer. For that same reason, I would like craft brewers to have that category and not hand that over to the spirit category or the wine category, because I'm incredibly selfish and would like these consumers to build that kind of relationship of creativity with craft brewers. There are certainly craft brewers out there that don't agree with me on that and think we should be more purist. That is what it is. Everyone has the right to their own opinion on that. But I would love for consumers out there to continue to associate that level of creativity in the beverage world with craft brewers. On that end, when I was talking to Ken Grossman earlier this year, we definitely dove in and talked a little bit about some of the things that, in particular, beer that he loved, but that didn't necessarily find a connection with a consumer. Over the last couple of years, have there been any beers that you all have made that you were really excited about, or that you personally really loved, but that for one reason or another, and it's because you have such a great team, it's not the quality of the liquid in the bottle or the can that's driving that, but just for some reason or another didn't find that connection with a consumer?
Yeah, I think the best beer we make is California Pale Ale. We don't make one at the moment that's available to consumers. And it's sort of elegant. It's, it has, it has a sort of it's floral. It's not heavily filling. It's quashable. It's just everything beautiful about hops in beer. And, we've almost forgotten it in our pursuit of the West Coast IPA and now the hazy IPA, and who knows where that will go next. I really regret the fact that we can't sell a California Pale Ale. And we had a beer called Pale 31 for a long time. And, it defined, Sierra Pale Ale aside, one of my favorite beers, Pale 31 sort of defined the category in many ways. It did extraordinarily well in that style. And yeah, we don't make it, we can't drink it. So yeah, that obviously, the big joke is Pivo. The amount of times that, Pivo has sort of passed the sort of annual production review, like, are we going to just sort of DC Pivo and make it only available in the tap room because people don't want to buy it in the market? And it sort of somehow squeaks by. It's sort of a cat with nine lives. It's an absolutely sublimely brilliant beer. And, but, do consumers want to buy it? No. Do bars want to put it on tap? Not normally. So, do wholesalers want to sell it? No. And it might have something to do with the fact that 80% of the beer made in America is a Pilsner, in inverted commas. So,
don't break my heart, David. Don't do it. Don't do it. It's not available in retail package up here in the Fort Collins market. And so from time to time, Colby, who works for Firestone Walker, will bring some up to me from Denver.
Good man.
Where it's still in package. Yeah. And, bless him. I look forward to every one of those drop-offs. My goodness. It's one of those things where for brewers, and for those of us in the world of beer who are this close to it, like a world without Pivo is just not a world that I want to live in.
And don't worry, you're going to be living for a long time because Pivo has special status. So fantastic. Well, let's zoom out here as we wrap up. Let's talk about the near term and the long term future. You mentioned earlier that you've got this goal in the decade to end up, closer to 1 million barrels. What are the near term goals? 2022, 2023. The last couple of years have been weird ones for everybody in life and especially in the beer world. What do those near-term goals look like? What are you most excited about pursuing? What do you identify as some of the biggest near-term challenges that you all are going to have to face? It is a little from from a hopes and dreams standpoint, it's a little bit like Groundhog Day. You sort of show up in January, it's another year ahead of you, and it's a lot of the same block and tackling. It's making more friends. It's making more beer. It's so there's no real sort of like, we're going to release the Apple, 15. It's more of the same. I mean, we are going to continue to keep the main thing, and what I mean by that is focus on where we're winning, and really make sure that we're driving as deep as we can in the places where we know we can do that, because it's not a mistake I believe we've made, but I think it's an easy mistake. I think you can underestimate, truly how deep you can go with your beer in certain markets. I mean, we've been sort of taught that by 805. It sort of showed us. It's like, guess what? You really can impact more consumers than you think, David. And so, I think we'd like, we've learned from that, and we want to continue to sort of really try and get into the fabric of the places where we know we're very successful. And that's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy at that point. There's more beer, it's fresher beer, it rotates better, there's more consumers, more people are sharing it. The beer is more affordable because we can, we're selling bigger packages, and so all of those things, I suppose, for our future. But sky's the limit, really. I mean, we're in 25 or so states, and it's we have good, healthy business in those states, and we continue to work them.
The conventional logic of owning your backyard is one thing, but then you realize that you can go 10 or 20 or 30 feet down and also claim all of the airspace above it too. And all of a sudden that backyard is a lot more volumetric than you might have thought that it was.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Is there any one thing in particular that really, really excites you?
It's just the potential. I look at the macro statistics on American beer, and you see that 70% of the beer that's made out there really is it's all brand. It's all sort of refreshment and good times. It's the brewers who brew it. If you ask them to brew another beer, they wouldn't brew that one. And I think that that's a giant sort of iceberg of opportunity for American craft brewers, and I think we'll continue to chip away at that, and I think our brewing community will get stronger and more influential, and I think watching that evolve over the next 10 years is going to be really interesting.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap this up. G&D Chillers will engineer your glycol piping for free. Explore a universe of sensory with hops from BSG, craft juice concentrates from Old Orchard, and a cost-effective solution for your fruit-forward needs. NA is no problem with the Alchemator from ProBrew. Get 10% off your next order from Mountain Rose Herbs with code CraftBeer10. And make your system 100% food safe with Clarion lubricants. If you'd like to support this podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com. Click on that subscribe button. We bring you great brewing content from some of the world's most inspiring brewers, and our all-access subscriptions bundle magazines with exclusive digital content and video classes, including some with the fantastic brewers of Firestone Walker that you cannot find anywhere else. David, normally we would ask people where to find Firestone Walker, but if you can't figure out where to find Firestone Walker in this world, then God bless you.
Amen. I'd agree.
Thanks for joining me on this ultimate 2021 episode, the pinnacle of our 2021 episodes of the Craft Beer Brewing Podcast. It's always wonderful to talk to you about brewing and your insight on where the industry is going and how craft brewers can make better beer that connects better with customers. Looking forward to some great things in 2022.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Amen. Thank you very much for taking an interest.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.